All right, we got a lot on the agenda today, so I'm going to kick things off. Let me share my screen. If I can figure this out, maybe I won't. All right, well, I don't know how to share my screen on Zoom yet. I'll paste the,
You press the share screen, the green button down there.
yeah, but how do you do it and not share everything?
Oh, no such way, unfortunately, unless you separate out the windows and tabs.
Yeah, anyway, here's a link to the meeting notes. Feel free to throw your name in the attendees list and tell all your friends they could be here too. Oops, let's start in a second. So welcome everyone to our Salsa working group meeting. I finally figured out the Zoom recording and got access to it. So posted the last meeting in the Open SSF YouTube channel. So I think there was a demo last time. A lot of people were looking for that. So feel free to check out the last meeting. And then we've got a bunch of stuff on the agenda today. And I think the first thing is Azra and Trishank, you're going to talk about what you talked about at KubeCon.
Yeah, I think the idea was just to quickly present, just to follow up on Michael's awesome demo the last time. Just wanted to show related ideas, how you can do things differently. Azra, how should we do this? Is it okay if I give a quick rundown and then you show the demo? Okay, great. Yeah, let's do that. So now I got to figure out how to share my screen. Let's see, Google Meet has got a very nice way to share. Only select tabs. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm sorry if some of you have already seen this talk, and but for the benefit of those who didn't, Azra and I just want to talk, and Santiago, if he's here, we just want to talk about what we call the state of the art of supply chain security as it is now. How you can, and particularly the reason I bring this up is to follow up on Michael's demo and talk about how when you put together technologies like this, part of the thing that I'm personally curious about is what will be grade the Salsa level of this? I think it'll be a good acid test for Salsa to see, will we give this level 1, level 2, level 3, is it a 2.5? I think it'll be an interesting test case. So anyway, the story is that Datadog wanted to, we have the agent, right? So Datadog is a monitoring company, to put it in a nutshell. And we have this thing called the agent that you install in the infrastructure, and then the integrations are kind of like add-ons for the agent, okay? And so we wanted to decouple the integrations from the agent. They used to be shipped together every 6 weeks, kind of like Chrome. So how do you do this? Well, you use CI/CD, right? You ship the integration separately from the agent. Great. So what can go wrong with the previous state of the art? Well, most of the time, nothing. Everything's good. 99.999 whatever percent, SLA is. Problem is, what happens if your developer key gets compromised, or your source code repository gets compromised, or your CI/CD, or your registry used to run the CI/CD jobs, key and file service. I think you get the idea. The point is, there's a million different things that can go wrong. And the problem is with the previous state of the art is that there's no compromised resilience. One thing goes wrong and the whole game is basically over. It's an all or nothing proposition. So the lesson is we can't prevent a compromise, but we can make it compromise resilient, as in, kind of like the old medieval fort where you build layers upon layers. A guy looking outside says, he sees the alligators in the moat and guys with flamethrowers, maybe even a nuclear weapon, and he says, forget about it. I'm going to go for easier targets. So how do you do this? Well, Azra, Santiago, and I claim that you can do this with 3 pieces of technology called Intoto, TUV, and Sixtor, respectively. And they're all very complementary technologies that when you put it together, you get a very strong whole. Kind of like a nonlinear sum, actually. The sum is greater than the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Okay, so the too long didn't read this. I'm not going to go through all the details. We don't have the time. I'm not trying to hijack the talk here, the meeting here to do a whole sales pitch. But the idea is that I'm not even making any money from this directly. But anyway, Intoto is kind of like Intoto is the technology that you use to secure the supply chain, right? I think we're all familiar with it here. You use it okay, here's how Intoto basically works. You sign the input and output of every CI/CD step. That's it. That's all you need to know. And then Tough will give you the artifact signing and the key distribution and rotation and all that good stuff. So you do a packaging, compromised resilient packaging of all your Intoto metadata as well as your artifacts. And then you add SigStore on top of that. Now you have a permanent immutable ledger for recording the end-to-end history of every single artifact that you've ever made. You can't even lie about it if you wanted to. So the metaphor is kind of like vaccines. To kind of drive it home, Intoto is kind of like Pfizer or Moderna or J&J or Novavax or whoever comes next and says, here's how I made my vaccines. Here's how much mRNA I use, how much lipid shells, whatever. You get the idea. And then Tough is kind of like the FDA saying, why should you trust Pfizer or Moderna or J&J or Novavax in the first place? And then finally, SigStore is kind of like the CDC saying, recording the end-to-end history of every single vaccine. You give it a lot number and the expiry date and whatnot, and then you can see, okay, this is exactly how everything was made. If something went wrong, now you have a permanent record of it. And I don't want to go into the details. This is about as far as we should go. And if you're interested in the details, you should please see our recorded talk when it comes out at Supply Chain Security Con last week. Azra, why don't you take it away from here, please, and show us your awesome demo of this actually working live in practice.
All right. So I wonder if I can. Okay. Sorry, screen sharing is confusing on Zoom. So what basically, I guess the demo is showing this whole like process of uploading. I'm sorry, I'm still trying to figure out sharing screens right now.
Yeah, it's confusing.
I think I got it. But so I wish I could pause this. Like, I don't think I can do this demo like with, I don't know if I can pause a GIF on the browser. Probably not. All right, I have no way of playing GIF. What I kind of want to show is like discoverability of like Require and Tough metadata on like on a demo. Basically what we have here is that the Datadog mechanism for, did I hear something? Okay, whatever. So the way that Datadog works is that there's a check for each of the integrations that downloads the Tough metadata and does verification, and then pulls in the verified metadata into a like local repository. And so on the other side of like Datadog doing like Tough metadata updates, so like issuing a timestamp every day or so, I think. What it also does is it uploads that Tough metadata to Recore directly. And so Recore has support for like just taking in a piece of Tough metadata associated with a root, verifying that that root signed that metadata, and then putting it in the log. And then what you can do from the verifier downloader side, which I think now the demo is actually running, that portion of this, it's verifying the Tough metadata, is that you can also go and check that that timestamp, which is a piece of the Tough metadata, was actually in the log. So basically what this is doing is saying, okay, I have more trust, I guess, in my remote repository because I know it is also like non-falsifiably in this log as a piece of Tough metadata. So that Recore search right there is searching based on the root, which is associated with that particular piece of Tough metadata. And so you can verify that it's in the log, and you kind of have some assurance over, okay, I know that Datadog has been uploading a history of these timestamp.jsons. That's kind of the demo. All I'm doing here is like verifying that the SHAs of the two timestamps match up with the one. So like the one that is in the log versus the one that you just downloaded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very cool, Azra. Thanks. I should have mentioned exactly how the setup works here too, and maybe maybe ask follow-up questions to the audience. Let me just quickly share my screen, and then we'll call this over. I just want to end with a few questions here. So sorry, I should have mentioned how this works in practice, how we do this for the agent integrations is that, so this is what our in toto supply chain basically looks like. There's 3 steps, okay? There's 4 steps. Implicitly, in toto does this thing called inspection at the end. The first step is our developers sign. So the integrations are basically just Python packages, zip files, they're wheels. Wheels are just zip files containing Python source code. Luckily, we're not compiling any source code here, so we don't need to worry about reproducible builds. So our developers sign Python source code with your YubiKeys. So even if someone's sitting on a laptop trying to get them to sign malicious stuff, they would know that because, well, there's a few things protecting them. One is the keys are generated and trapped, right? Generated, and you have to sign everything using the YubiKey. So you can't even run away with a signing key. The second thing protecting is every signing operation requires a touch operation on the YubiKey. You literally have to touch it. So there's a very tight race condition that attackers have to do to manage to convince them to sign off something malicious. And even then, you can do things like you require 2 or more developers to sign off on the same. You need a collusion, basically. So you've set the bar for compromise very, very high. So developers sign off source code, okay, using the YubiKeys. And then these are all link files. These are just attestations. Links are just special cases of in toto attestations. Now, if you're familiar with attestation, but not links. And then we have the CI/CD. I want to talk about, there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. So our CI/CD basically, too long didn't read. We checked that it pulls the same source code from GitHub that developer signed, and then puts it in the zip file that I was talking about. And then this guy signs everything using tough metadata, wraps it all together, nice, that FDA seal of approval kind of thing. And at the end, the agent will, the interesting thing is this, the agent will unzip first check that the wheel was produced by our pipeline, right? But then it'll unzip it transparently. And then check that the source code was actually signed by our developers. So I don't have to trust my CI/CD at all. In fact, I don't use any trusted hardware here. I don't need to really tighten the CI/CD. This is why I'm bringing on the context of Salsa. Do I really need trusted hardware in my CI/CD? It's nice, but it doesn't actually get me stronger security guarantees, I claim, because my root of trust is in the developer. So this is something I want us to talk about also. Which Salsa does focus on source requirements, but sometimes I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on build, and I'm trying to make the argument that if you set it up right, if you place your emphasis of trust, your root of trust in the source, you don't really need to worry too much about your build environment. And I claim that should be one of the last few pieces you work on, maybe Salsa levels 3 or 4. So that's one thing. Yeah, and then we don't need, sorry, go ahead. Okay,
Sorry, I was just going to ask if that was true for languages where you can effectively recover the source from the final archive, right? Like Python's somewhat unique, not unique, a special case there, right? So for something like Go, right, would that same assertion hold in your opinion?
This is true. That's a good point. Yeah. So for something like Go or something compile binaries, you're gonna need to do something like what SolarWinds did, right? Different pipelines, literally compiling the same thing, and then if there's no collusion, hopefully you get out the same hash. And Bitcoin Core also does this. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's a good caveat. Yes. But my point is, you still need to check what developers are doing. This is something that I feel that people miss. It's very important that developers sign the goods in the first place. What else? Yeah, that's really what I wanted to talk about here. How would we rate the Salsa level of this? Maybe open it up for discussion. So, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Trishank. I think I need to look at the details more and think about more to actually map it to the requirements. One thing I've been thinking about, I've talked to some of you about this, and it's never really connected, but I'll bring it up anyway. Salsa kind of has 2 separate pieces. One is when you have a package linking it back to the source. And 2 is properties, how you know the source is okay, around two-party review, and there's version control and strong identities. It seems like that what you describe here, at least the build part, because effectively it's a no-op build, like, and I think we might have that in the doc, that like you said, if you have a no-op build, it is trivial, like you trivially satisfy all the build requirements because there is no build, right? Like the fact that it's zipped up, the client unzips it, so it undoes that information, so you don't need to do it. So in my opinion, all those would be satisfied by that aspect. There's as Matt said, like I think it only works for the special case here where you're distributing source packages. It doesn't work for, I think, probably the large majority of packages that have any sort of compilation. But yeah, I think the Salsa 4 has a requirement two-party review that is not, well, I guess if you have two people sign off, you could satisfy the two-party review aspect using that mechanism.
One, I guess an outstanding question, like if like this approach works in some cases where you can have the client sort of undo the packaging operation and verify the source directly, that does seem helpful, but it does put the burden on the clients to be able, like they then need to know how to undo those transformations, which might be different from package to package. Like for Python, it's X, for Maven it's Y. Whereas I think if when you're verifying Salsa provenance, if you can have confidence in the build process, which is what a lot of the build requirements are for, then the client just needs to check the build entry point, that it's what they expect, and that the sources come from an appropriately leveled source control system, and that setup could work for, I believe, for all types of artifacts, even those that aren't trivially sort of reversible.
Right. So to answer your question there, yeah. So going to Mark's point, yeah. The thing I'm curious about is, what do we do about pipelines like mine here, for example, where it has it meets some properties of some Salsa levels, but not necessarily all of them. It's kind of like a weird mix and match, right? So I'm kind of curious how we would tackle something like that. That's one. Two, to answer your question, Tom, one is, so the in total layout, actually you can specify down to the nail exactly how clients should verify, should do the inspection at the end. So I do agree that'll be different for Go. You might want to check that the hashes from two different pipelines match. And maybe for like things like Python or PHP or Perl, you do the kind of simple check that I was talking about. But the point is that developers can specify this actually.
So maybe the first question, like how do you get this pipeline into Salsa? I think that in some part, like that boils down to like, where is the Salsa provenance generated and signed? And I think what you could do is like currently where you have the agent unpacking the wheel, verifying the source code came from the developers. That might be a good opportunity within an organization to have some sort of lockdown and secure system that does that, and then it emits the Salsa provenance that says, hey, this thing is good. I think that's how some of the I want to say in one of your proposals, Mark, you suggest that that the Salsa provenance could be generated directly by the builder, which is necessary in like some cases, but you could also in other cases have some external entity look at logs that the builder produces and generate the provenance from that. I think this is a third option where you would have an agent analyze the results, sort of undo the transformations and verify that it comes from where we think.
Exactly. So, sorry, go ahead.
Really quickly, so like there are binary compilation steps in construction of a lot of wheels. So I don't think the operation.
Sorry, you're breaking up really badly. Is it just me?
No, he's breaking up. Matt, do you maybe want to type it in the chat if it's typable?
Maybe try turning off the video.
Oh, he's frozen.
Sorry, but I think I understand the gist of his questions. Yes, Python wheels are generally not just source packages. You do have binaries in them, and I'm aware of a Python effort to deterministically compile this package. I don't have the URL handy right now, but I'll share it with the group, perhaps in the community meeting notes. But yes, it is true. So yeah, just wanted to throw it out there again. I didn't want to spend the whole meeting in this, of course not. Just wanted to show, what can be done with these technologies, and kind of curious about how Salsa would grade something like this.
Yeah, I think like in terms of, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, in terms of like next steps, I think probably would be good is if we could try to figure out somehow to document like in more details than the abstract requirements, like case studies or things that we think meet Salsa. I know there's an issue open right now that, or is it pull request maybe? Either way, on like how to do it on GitHub. I think those type of things of like case studies would be useful to give people more, like instead of having to synthesize everything themselves, they could kind of see, oh, well, I could do it like this, I could do it like that. I think that would be good.
Something that would serve the function of a reference implementation in a sense.
Yeah.
Mark, can I ask a quick question? Do you have any idea how of that reference of how to do it on GitHub?
I'll paste in the chat there's a open issue, I think.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we've been
It's not really
Gotcha.
Yeah. Joshua, open this. 185.
Well, thank you.
Cool. I may have missed some of the questions in the chat, but I'm going to move on to the next item just so we get through everything today. So I think next on the list is Priya.
Yeah. Hey everyone. Okay, cool. Let me share my screen. Hopefully I can figure this out as everyone else did.
You're muted, Priya. Start over. Still muted.
Sometimes I think this happened to me last week, when you go to present, it mutes your microphone because it tries capturing your computer. So then you have to go back to the tab and unmute it.
Okay. The problem with the Google Meets is we always need a host. And and it has to be the person that created the meeting, so it makes it really difficult because you can't add multiple hosts. So if Google wants to fix that problem, I would be happy to switch it back.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Does this well for what it's worth. Sorry.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah. Okay. So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about merging the Tecton provenance and the Salsa provenance so that we could just have one that would work for everyone. So this is basically a proposal for V2, and it makes a few changes, and I think this format should work really well for both. So I don't know how in detail people want me to go right now, but basically the two biggest changes I think is that we have replaced what was formerly defined in material with something called config source. So config source is no longer a pointer. It actually will inline entry point URI and digest. So instead of pointing to a material, it could point to anything, even if it wasn't in a material, which works better for the Tecton case. And in general, I think removing the pointer probably just makes more sense as well. And then the other kind of bigger changes, we added a section called build config, which would basically include like the steps that were actually executed during a build. So in Tecton, this would be like all the steps in a task, like in Google Cloud Build, it would be like the steps in your cloudbuild.yaml. And the reason that we wanted to include this is because at like lower Salsa levels in Tecton right now, we actually can't really set define a material or necessarily point to the exact task that was run. So kind of our next best option is to just put all the information for each step that was run so that people can kind of recreate the YAML themselves from the provenance. And then kind of a smaller change, we renamed recipe to invocation, just kind of seems to like sit better with people. But invocation will still kind of include config source, which used to be define a materials, environment, which is the same as it was before, and parameters, which we've renamed from arguments, but basically comprises of the same stuff. And the final change is to add in a high-level build type URI, which will basically determine like the format of invocation, build config, and materials. So it would look something like this. Oh, I've somehow stopped sharing. Oops.
So sorry, this is the Salsa one right now, or Tecton? Gotcha.
You're mute.
Oops.
You're mute.
Sorry, you'd think after like 2 years of work from home, I would have this down, but apparently not. Okay, sorry. So this is the proposed V2 of the Salsa provenance, and if this ends up being merged and everyone's okay with it, then we probably just switch to using this in Tecton. But yeah, so basically the changes I just mentioned, but again, we keep builder ID as it was, add in this build config, which would include all the steps that were actually executed during the build, rename recipe to invocation, and replace define a material with this config source. Rename arguments with parameters, just because I think the word makes a little bit more sense for a lot of people. And then we have this build type URI, which will basically indicate to people what the format of like build config and materials would be. I know I just said a lot of things, so I'm sure people have questions.
Interesting, thanks. Could you, I think it would be helpful to show how this compares to Tecton. So are you saying that this aligns with Tecton right now?
So we would change a little bit of how the Tecton provenance looks right now, but I think it should map pretty well. Let me see if I can pull up the current Tecton format.
Because this was the thing that was, to me, wasn't clear from the GitHub issue.
Mm-hmm. For sure. There's no easy way to switch sharing with tabs, is there? Try this again. Just gonna share my screen this time. So this is the current Tecton provenance format. So basically, what we have is like this section recipe.steps, which was the main like thing that we added, and this would basically turn into what build config is in the proposal, where we just like put in all the information of each container that was run, everything that was passed in, so people could like recreate the Tecton YAML if they needed to. Materials pretty much matches up. Invocation will switch, and parameters are kind of the same. We'll just have to make a change to start using the source config, the config source that's in the proposal, and add in the environment again if we need to.
So one thing that I asked that if you have any opinions on this. It's good to get this now because we picked the original names. I think only a couple of the folks here were involved in the original design. Several of the things that Priya changed were because like she wasn't the only one who had confusion around like what recipe meant. And so if there's anything more that like just is kind of continuing source of confusion or that could be named better, probably now is the time to fix it, because we want to bundle up these changes in once instead of kind of doing a bunch of little things. So any feedback would be appreciated.
So I'm curious whether there's been any, whether there are any sort of third attempts at this in the wild that we might consider engaging with, or I don't know, maybe such a thing does not exist yet, but just as a, something to sort of compare this with.
Yeah, so not particularly an actual attestation format per se, but Nick's derivation output looks very similar to this sort of thing, and is probably worthwhile to also take a look at, because it does include sort of the stuff like what were the inputs, what was the build, what was the build script, what was the build arguments, what were environment variables, and so on. So it might be worthwhile to also take a look there as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think that would be a good idea.
And Priya, when are you looking to kind of finalize this? So when should people get feedback in by?
Ideally by like the end of the week. I was hoping to have the PR or sometime next week.
Cool.
So that's actually one thing I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but if people have thoughts on like how we do changes like this, right now it has a -alpha suffix. I was thinking that could be a signal that it's unstable and like no one should be relying on this until we finalize it and remove the suffix. That way we could kind of continue to have a period where we could bundle changes, so we don't have like constant breaking of changes, but we could bundle it into like when we release 2, we could have something else. But I don't know if folks have a few, because that would also allow us to submit it, have people be able to look at it, review it, and fix things before finalizing.
Mm-hmm.
Given that we don't have like a update to process. Sorry?
I said, is the 0 dot not enough for the major version?
So I think an example is that so internally at Google, we are having people start to implement 0.1, and if we're going to make changes, then we need to point them at the next thing that they should do. And I think it's just is 0.2 going to keep evolving, or should this just be submitted as 0.2 now? If any changes come in, then there's 0.3, then there's 0.4. I think that the only issue is that doesn't give any indication of any sort of completeness. When we take 0.1, we thought, okay, this is fine for now. We don't have anything else pending. But I don't know if 0.2 is there yet.
I think I have another question here, which is at what point we should be doing a version 1? So let's say we merge all these changes, and do people think it's a good time to do that, or do people feel it's a long way to version 1? That would be another question. Because we did a version 1 with Salsa, right? Bringing it to a state so that it proves people hey, this is stable, start using it. So we might want to do the same thing for Salsa provenance, right? To make sense.
Trishang said in the comments, I agree that I feel like the 0 point is a nice indicator because we don't have any real implementations of people doing this. I think it's good to let early implementers know you're doing something early and you're going to have to change later. I think a 1.0 would be some sort of indication of long-term support, and I don't feel like we're there yet because it's not been battle tested enough. At least personally,
Okay, so it looks like people are chiming towards just keeping 0 point whatever without the alpha, and keeping as implementations go, then decide V1 later, right? Trishank and Joshua, you want to add anything? Sounds good. Okay, so we can remove alpha there.
Yeah, the other, I had briefly in the notes, because now that we do have several implementations, there's like I think there's something in Tecton, there's various provenance generators, there's something in a couple in Toto implementations. How we keep track of these and kind of update them as we go. I don't have any experience doing this in the open source world. So if anyone has kind of ideas on how to track these and let these implementations know, or how we should handle that, that's certainly welcome too. What process we should use.
Yeah, agreed. One thing I just wanted to point out is, yeah. So from the CNCF side, right, we are building out that reference architecture, building out the reference implementation, and we do plan to say, hey, assuming you follow all the rules in the reference architecture, this is your general sort of Salsa level that the artifacts that are being produced should be. And so we'd love to be able to kind of like link to however we want to kind of show that off.
Anyway, we could probably discuss that on, offline. Shall we move on to the next topic?
Yep, let's do it. Peter, looks like we're getting a revamped website. Peter, are you on the call?
I am on the call. Hi, hello everyone. I've just put a link into the chat as well. It's also in the community meeting notes for those who want to see it there. So hi everyone, for those who don't know me, I'm from a company called Projects by If. And we helped build up the current salsa.dev site. That was based on research with a chunk of potential Salsa users and other people across the open source, various people across the open source community to work out what people wanted there. We're just planning to do some more updates over the time frame through to early December, starting within the next week or two. The document just contains an overview of what we're planning to do at this point. So firstly, there's going to be updates to the salsa.dev site design. So visual presentation, branding, some better illustration to support some of the key messages and use cases, and the new threats diagram, although now the threats diagram is in the Operation Salsa video, which I think starts later. I'm worried about changing that because of the Operation Salsa video is important to the community. I know that. Looking at some content around the steering committee and community activity, and we'll be contacting you to get some input, various members of the community to get inputs for that. Looking at the Salsa ladder, the Salsa motivation ladder, and how that can be incorporated and made more public through the web presence as well as in the GitHub repos and issues where it's being discussed at the moment. I know that's discussed at one of the previous community meetings. I'm going to be measuring this. So in the previous work we did, we were measuring it through user research and user testing. We're going to trial a slightly different method this time round of doing a survey, both out to community members and to potential Salsa users who will find through some participant selection methods, doing a survey before the changes and after the changes to see if they're having the desired effect of communicating the concepts cleanly, helping inform people and helping increase adoption, or bringing more people in to take advantage of the great work you're doing while understanding things like the caveats that Mark just mentioned around this is in its early stage of development and adoption by various people. Just make sure we're communicating those things nice and clearly. Obviously, all of the work we're doing will go through the standard governance processes. It'll go through as GitHub pull requests. We can also present back at subsequent community meetings if that would be useful as interim steps. We can do that there, as well as through the GitHub repo. So we're happy with those things. And we're also obviously also happy, I've to share the Google document. Everyone should have edit rights. I'll handle the spam on that myself, but do feel free to leave comments, suggestions, or to contact myself or Dev Morgan, our project lead, who's actually on holiday this week. So I'm standing in for him with any comments, suggestions, ideas, or how you'd like to get involved. And we'll work that into our planning as we get the team up and running. I spoke fairly fast, covered a bit of ground, but hopefully the document is fairly self-explanatory as well. And I'm up for questions, or I'll go back on mute. I'll go back on mute because no question. So you can get back on again.
Yeah, I think whenever you want to come present or update the community or could use community feedback, just put yourself in the agenda. Looking forward to new improvements to the site.
Will do.
Thanks, Peter. All right, let's see, a couple more items left. Next is Matt. We're going to talk about build as code issue. There's a link in the doc for the issue. I think it's number 188 in the repo.
Yeah, so there was some discussion on the issue as well. But I think the wording in isolation, I found somewhat confusing sort of as a line item. And effectively, I think what it comes down to is concern around at higher Salsa levels, the configuration coming in as the input being used to effectively validate itself, right? I think of trust as sort of an induction, right? Where you take the things you've proven to be trustworthy so far and you use it to establish trust on the things sort of moving forward. And so I think the issue sort of spelled out how some of the different aspects of Salsa are intended to sort of complement each other and work together to achieve some of those things. But I think we may want to find ways to clarify some of those things sort of, if they're being looked at in a more a la carte fashion, then I need all of the Salsa 3 things to achieve this thing, so that it's clear what things folks might be giving up as they drop one thing or another thing. And even that may be somewhat context sensitive, right? I'm reminded of sort of what Trishank was bringing up at the beginning with sort of some things being trivially verifiable, trivially non-falsifiable because you can sort of reverse the output to get back to the inputs. So yeah, I don't know how much we want to talk about this. Mark, Trishank, do you want to talk about any parts of this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Matt. I had also, I think, talked to some other folks about the same thing, that like one aspect of it, of like, because you said like, the code config evaluates itself. I think there's an unspoken thing that needs to be documented, which is that some of the requirements, like the project owner or whatever we want to call it, like the software owner can do, right? Switching to a new build system or making a build reproducible or something like that. And in other things, the build platform has to provide, like the isolation between builds and like proper protection of the signing keys and things. And there's this unspoken or this unwritten principle that we need to document, which is around kind of reducing the trust base. That like we are, well, one thing is that we're kind of mapping from build back to the source. I think Trishank mentioned that in his slide too. Like that is one of the principles. Another principle is that we shouldn't, or at least in my opinion, this is something that we should discuss and agree upon as a group, is that we don't want to trust like the million developers out there, but maybe we trust a couple small organizations, a couple organizations, like if you trust GitHub Actions to do your build, or Travis, or whatever your system is, or a system of reproducible builds, or whatever reason, but we want to kind of explicitly enumerate what the trust base is and shrink that as much as possible. I think if anyone has ways or wants to write even better on how to document that and communicate that, I think it's needed.
This is a good discussion. Thanks for raising this. I think there's two. If you think about it, there's actually two ways to actually specify what your supply chain looks like, right? One is in your CI/CD itself. So things like GitHub Actions, that YAML file, or GitLab, or Circle CI, or Jenkins, whatever you name it. All of them have their own separate. And I do agree that it needs to be versioned and controlled and all that good stuff. But that is not what you're actually going to use at the end of the day to verify your artifact, because the thing that should be establishing trust for what your CI/CD looks like is not those YAML files, but the in total layout that I was talking about earlier. And I'm not sure yet whether does Salsa have a place for layout files yet, or are we so far doing attestation so far, basically the equivalent link files but no layout yet? Did I miss something? Tom, Mark?
No, you're right. That's unspecified right now. We had been calling that policy. Layout in total layout is kind of one way of evaluating policy, and I think the thing that in total in particular brings is the ability to kind of sign and distribute a policy that someone else can evaluate. And how do you know that it's like a legitimate policy? That still has to be worked out. Originally, in one of the very early drafts, we had stuff around policy. It was confusing and we couldn't agree on it, so we kind of cut it out and said something is Salsa for if it has these properties, without talking about policy. But I do feel like a policy is important, is a critical, not just important, is a critical aspect that we need to somehow fold back in. But
yeah, well, and I tried to talk about that some in Joshua and my talk on Salsa, but I think that I disagree with the point that the YAML files aren't important. What we're trying to do with like having the attestations reference the YAML files and then have the policy say which YAML files are acceptable is to provide the ability for users to look at a policy file and say and like immediately understand like what is appropriate. And one of the issues with like simply having attestations record every single step that occurred in a CI/CD pipeline is that an end user who's a consumer of this software has no idea of like if these steps that are listed here, like, are those appropriate? Should it have run this script? Should it have like tarred this in that way? Should it have applied those permissions? They don't know. But what having the end user policy focused around the build instruction specification, which is what the YAML file is, and having that specification stored in source control that requires two-party review is that then they can say, one, which source repo is this? They can go and they can look and like they can look at that file and like get an idea. Okay, like is this the like curl cloud build.yaml, and like do I trust the build system that produced this attestation that says that artifact with hash XYZ came from like was built in accordance with like these instructions, because the end user doesn't care about all of those details and they can't, like they're not really in a position to say if they're correct. But I think that as you've outlined and as we've discussed, like that there is a place for that, for what Entoto is doing with the layouts, in that it can add further assurance maybe before you emit that like final attestation, that according to the developers that are the experts, that all of the things that should have happened did.
Yeah. Yes. Where I would disagree is that so the definition of build pipeline is important, but you're missing two pieces of information there. One is it's not so the way Entoto attestations are signed, Entoto policy files, the way Mark puts it, would be signed. That's the difference between these YAMLs and the policy or layout files, is that one is immutable, right, cryptographically. The other one is that by just looking at the YAML files, you're still not sure who's supposed to use what keys. That's the importance of the layout or policy file, is that you at least know that at the time that was committed, this is what the shape of your pipeline is supposed to look like and who's supposed to use what keys in the first place. I think those that crucial information is missing from the YAML files, which don't get me wrong, I think is super important.
Yes, right. And so the YAML file is like just a part of it. That like in the talk we discuss how the policy file should specify which YAML file is pardon me. The policy file specifies which YAML file should have been executed, and the policy file also specifies which builder should have been used, and that builder maps to some set of keys.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly.
So
I don't
just
know
a
if this
time
answers Matt's question, but hopefully it helps.
So just a time check, we have 8 minutes left, and I think there's 2 more topics.
Sorry, I had to step away to grab a sweatshirt. Were you saying we're ready to cover the last couple topics? Yeah. Okay, cool. So I added on here, there was an Open SF TAC meeting. For those folks on the call who haven't seen, the Open SF has kind of revamped itself, and now there's a new structuring of the governing board, and there's premier members now that are paying money. The first year of existence, COVID hit, and it was sort of free for members to join. Anyway, they are looking now for budget proposals for projects, so things that projects might need. So I think for Salsa, maybe a couple of things are maybe some help with the website is one possibility if community feels like that's important. Swag is another fun one. That we could put together some t-shirts with our fun goose and the salsa dress on. So I don't know all the details. David actually might know more than me. Looks like he's on the call now if he's anything to share. If there's any timelines or deadlines we need to be aware of to get those proposals in, or kind of how these are being shaped, but just wanted to throw that out there.
I can quickly answer, which is I don't have a deadline, but I have an end deadline you can work back. We'd like to summarize some things for at least starting the discussion at the November 5 governing board. But that means that we've got to get ideas, and I think the ideas we're good. Brian and I are probably going to collate all these ideas to at least begin that discussion. I don't think that has to be resolved November 5 necessarily, but we'd like to at least start collecting those. So I would think by next week, we'd want to get some of those ideas. And I would say just posting on like the various working group mailing lists. I intend to send out an email later today begging for suggestions.
Okay, cool.
We'll try to collect it together. So
Awesome.
basically start posting, and we'll start collecting, and we'll at least to start that discussion.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know if like infrastructure credits is something this project needs yet, but like things like that are, I think, on the table. So look out for the email from David, and we can try to collect some things if there's anything, and then pass it up to the governing board and TAC for decision. And then the last thing I had on the agenda, we heard a couple of mentions of this of Peter. In case folks haven't seen it yet, there's an Operation Salsa video. This was quite a fun project that I somehow got talked into. Priya, the star of our show, is on the call and talked to us earlier today. Definitely check it out. It was, a fun way for us to try to help explain salsa more broadly to, broader audiences, to help drive awareness. I do think, Peter, that I actually don't know how much work it is, but the screen was a green screen, so we can swap out the diagram if need be. And, I think sort of some of our original goals doing this was to really drive into like the threats and try to build out the video series that way. Of course, these are very expensive to make, so I'm not sure if we'll get all the way there, but maybe we can get more creative and try to break those things out. But definitely take a look at the video. It's a fun watch. Share it with your friends and your parents, like I did with mine, and then they laughed. Yeah.
Can I propose? I mean, we don't have to make the decision, I guess, today, but the salsa.dev page doesn't link to this. That seems like a mistake.
Yeah, I don't know if we added it to the repo either, but I think, yeah, we missed it. Peter was talking us through like revamping the salsa.dev page a bit, but maybe we can add it in there somewhere as a quick update. So I think it's up to like 6,000 views now too, which is pretty good. Cool. All right, I think we're about out of time. Next week, we have a presentation from the Microsoft folks on a project that's called Skim. And then Josh and Trishank have a topic for artifact signing key distribution. And I think someone suggested maybe doing a deep dive on the Nix stuff, so maybe that'll come in too, but feel free to add other things. We might have time for a couple more topics if folks want to add them. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. And we will catch up in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Will someone post the links to the to this gathering? Because I wanted to see this demo that I missed earlier.
Yeah,
today.
I'm finally figuring out. Zoom like gives 8 files when you record a session, and now I finally have access to the Zoom account, and then I have to figure out which video it is, and then I'll get it uploaded to the OpenSSF YouTube channel.
Ah, okay. So if you can let everybody know when you post there, so some of us who missed this can go see it.
Yeah, I will. I'll send a link in the Slack when I do that, and then I try to add a link back to the notes doc too for the recording. So.
Oh, awesome! That would be great. Thank
The
you
old
so
one is
very
in
much,
there
Kim.
now. No problem.
Thanks.
All right,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you. Ciao.
Have a good one.
Bonjour.